Okay, so
Okay.
good evening, Professor Colarusso.
Mhm.
Thank
Good
you for
morning.
yes, yes,
For you, evening. For me, morning. Yeah.
yes.
Hmm.
Thank you uh, for for having this discussion with me. You have a extensive career working in linguistics, mythology. You studied mythology of North Caucasus. You worked in
Hmm.
the they did research for decades in all things related to languages for Northwest and Northeast Caucasus and uh, mythology, specifically Nart Sagas. And so that's why I
Okay.
want to have this conversation with you and talk about them. And
Hmm.
so first I want to ask, how did you end up studying this very niche, at least geographically and like culturally, this area, North Caucasus and North Caucasian languages? I've seen that in one of the interviews you mentioned that you started with ancient Greek and ancient Armenian and Georgian, and then you came across this movie where this savage division that participated in World War One dance. They have this Potemkin movie from Sergei Eisenstein, yeah. And you saw them dancing, and that's how you got interest in Northern Caucasus, specifically Northwest Caucasus, and you went on studying many more languages like adyghe and all the dialects, and eventually you learned more than 10, 20 languages. Is that right? And
Well, anyway,
can you
my
talk
wife,
about that? Yeah.
my wife says 18.
Okay.
Easy come, easy go. So if I don't use them, as with any person, they go into storage, I call it. So they can be revived. But so, for example, my Russian I haven't used in over 20 years. So when I was last in Moscow, I couldn't understand a word until day three. And suddenly on day three, Russian came back, and there it was in my head again. This is something, this kind of polyglot behavior is still being studied, and no one quite understands. There is a Dr. Ivanenko at MIT who I've spoken to. She's doing brain scans of polyglots, and the finding is counterintuitive. The part of the brain, the left side of the brain, which is supposedly involved with speech, there's some evidence that the right is also involved. But anyway, the left, she says very little of it's activated. It's like a child, like nothing really serious going on. Whereas she expected to see massive, involvement of all the areas. She said, no, it's just the opposite. So something odd is going on. And I said that these are people who, who have not undergone a proper adolescence in some way. So when you're a child, you can learn any number of languages you're exposed to. And no one marvels at it, but children do it all the time. But when you hit puberty, it just stops, right? The other thing that stops, there's a gland down here called the thymus gland, and it has something to do with a child developing antibodies and resistance to disease. And when they hit puberty, this shrinks up and disappears. So I suggested that, next time you have a polyglot, check out his or her thymus gland to see if they're not sort of like a child in some sense, and their brain is still working like a child and picking up all the languages. And so I said, you would say that this would be a neotenous mind. So in other words, a mind that is still juvenile in some way, in some physiological sense. As to getting involved, well, I did see the Potemkin footage, and I thought, oh, this is interesting, sort of weird stuff. But I didn't think of anything linked to it, except by another professor. I was a graduate student at the time, and this professor was Calvert Watkins, a famous Indo-European scholar. He's dead now. And he handed me a cassette. And he said, my friend W.S. Allen, W. Sidney Allen over in England, said this language has only two vowels. I think he's full of shit. You know, you listen to this, and you tell me how many vowels this language has. So I took the cassette and I played it and I listened and I transcribed the entire 15-minute story about bzedukh. And I went back to Cal Watkins and I said, yeah, he's right. It only has two vowels. You know, and I mean, what those languages are doing, which nothing else does, except in some odd places like Ethiopia, the liturgical language of Ethiopia, the Ge'ez is called. Um, Most languages, the vowels color the consonants. Okay, so the K and key in English is further forward in anticipation of the E. And if you say car, it's further back in anticipation of the A. Uh, but no, these languages do just the opposite. They color the vowel uh, by the consonant. So they're the mirror image of what most languages do, which makes them really quite fascinating in a way. And then if you start looking at the grammar is extraordinarily complicated. Circassian, Ubykh. I learned a good bit of Ubykh from the late Hans Vogt, um, who worked worked with Edward Sapir, had Edward Sapir as a supervisor. And Sapir is a very famous hyperpolyglot. And there was one tale that Sapir was taking a train across the United States and got off for a break for a couple of days in someplace in New Mexico or whatever, and ended up having lunch with someone who spoke Paiute and got up from the table speaking Paiute. uh, I'm sure it's an exaggeration, but this is the kind of strange stuff that goes on. And then Vogt was a polyglot. He was a hyperpolyglot. I have occasionally been labeled a hyperpolyglot, although I don't think I'm up to that standard. But I do find that the languages of the Caucasus, east or west, or in the middle, or south as well, they're extraordinary. And so you have these sort of patterns. You have sort of Altaic, Turkic languages, you have Indo-European languages, you got Semitic languages. And then in the middle of all this, you have the Caucasus, which are these strange, strange languages. So anyway, I decided to study that. The one thing, I was a graduate student at Harvard, and Harvard was, as you might expect, very conservative. And so we actually had to learn a language and other than English and learn something about the family to which it belonged. So we had some people working on Mayan and some of the Mayan languages and that stuff. And two of us, oddly enough, Alice Harris and myself, both ended up doing Caucasus. And I must say that at that time, this would be the early 70s, way back when, this was extraordinarily rare, and very few people even knew where this was. But now it's sort of a known area, and you get people who do economics, you get people who do strategic studies of the Caucasus, blah, 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 and so forth and so on. It's now become a major, or not major, but now become a significant academic area of research, which is going to be good for the people of the Caucasus, I think. I hope.
Yes, I think, as you said, it's a very strange and interesting place, and it's like sticks out in 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 many aspects when you look at it, like culturally and linguistically specifically. But it's sort of forgotten always. Like it's people, it's so sort of always forgotten. It's not a part of the conversation. That's why I
Yeah.
think find it very interesting that you decided to um, go and study it.
Hmm.
And along with linguistics, you also went and studied myth, is specifically Nart Sagas, and
Hmm. Hmm.
then you wrote the books on Nart Sagas. I think it's only ones available in English are your books on ossetian and adyghe, the two books at least that I know. And I have the ossetian ones I have. I'm going through it now. And my question would be, I think, what place do you think this mythology mm, uh, takes in broader context of Eurasian myth? As I've heard you say, I've heard you saying that it's the Caucasian, North Caucasian mythology links European and Asian or Middle Eastern mythologies in a way, or it's connected to Greek mythology with strong ties. So just generally, how do you find its place in its broader context? And yeah.
Yeah. Okay, first thing is that good stories don't recognize boundaries. They hop all over the place and they spread and propagate, and they start out probably maybe in some Indo-European language, and then they end up in Circassian, which is not Indo-European. Um, and this is something that languages don't do. So you have to adjust if you're going to switch a little bit over to studying the text. Um, you have to be prepared for that. They, this sounds perhaps self-serving and dramatic, but I would say that doing historical work on the folklore or mythology of Eurasia generally can no longer be done without reference to Nart Sagas. They are extraordinarily rich, extraordinarily conservative. Um, I mean, there is a scholar working on the uh, folklore of the Kyrgyz. His name is Daniel Pryor. We've known each other for about 25 years. And there are features in Kyrgyz that are reminiscent of Indo-European material, particularly Iranian, um, Zoroastrian stuff, things like that. And I've encouraged him to explore this dimension of what he's looking at, but nothing comes close to what you're looking at when you look at Ossetian material. You're looking at Circassian or Ubykh material or Abkhazian material or Chechen material. And I have a collection of the Chechen stuff. I've just never had a chance to get around to it. And now I'll be 80 years old in a few months. And maybe I'll have some time to do some of it. But apparently it was hidden in someone's mattress when the Chechens were expelled and then recovered. It had a dramatic history. Um, so it's a very vital and important contribution or addition to the material that people look at. So people look at ancient Greek, they look at ancient Old Norse, something in Old English, perhaps, may catch somebody's attention and they may work on that. I have a manuscript, someone sent me a manuscript of 500 pages, all about Beowulf in Old English, the entire thing. Um, so this explains a great deal. It particularly explains an enormous amount of material that's found in Hinduism and in the Rig Veda, the very oldest layer prior to Hinduism, really technically it's Vedic they call it. And things that have puzzled scholars looking at Vedic for generations, and boom, there they are. The Nart Sagas. It's transparent and I tell you exactly what's going on, this sort of thing. So they're very important. Um, why did I start? There were two reasons why I went. I did do a grammar of Kabardian, which is the dialect I know least well. Um, I learned bzedukh, actually. But the reason, the Kabardian, they wanted someone to do Kabardian. They had no one to do it, so I ended up doing it. It was a project. And so when I was in graduate school up in Boston or Cambridge, technically, uh, I would travel down to New Jersey, where I had grown up, and deal with a community of Circassian speakers down there, primarily with two men, Isa Tarkwala and Rashid Habsu. Um, and then later, Majidine Hilmi and some others. But um, when I came to Canada and settled down in or settled down in Ontario, here in Hamilton, there was no one to talk to. So to keep the language sort of up and running, I started translating stories. And that's one reason. The other reason, the other reason um, was more linguistic. I uh, uh, had a dispute with Chomsky, and it affected my career, as disputes with Chomsky predictably would have. And Chomsky kept saying language had no evolution. And I knew enough paleontology as a hobby to know that that was bullshit. And that was some kind of very strange intellectual distortion on his part. So I said, I'll give you a theory. And I made up a theory of language evolution based on information theory, something I knew something about. Because I started my academic life in physics and had all this math and stuff. And so, all right, um, I couldn't get it published. Why? Because the editor said, Chomsky says language is no evolution. And I thought, this is a field without really serious, intellectual credentials. So I began to take the mythology much more seriously. In a way, I sort of turned my back on linguistics with the what I saw as the distortions that Chomsky was promulgating. Um, and I still do. I teach linguistics and stuff, but um, it's been a long time since I've sat down and done a theoretical linguistic paper. The other thing was I had all these translations in a file, and my lovely wife came along one day and saw me poking through a filing cabinet. And she said, "What's all that stuff?" And I said, "Oh, it's a bunch of stories." And she said, "Well, what are they doing in there? Get them out, take them out, publish them somewhere." And they ended up being published by Princeton University Press in a series on myth, so quite prestigious position. And then it was followed with the help of Sabiev. No, what's his first name? He's 7 feet tall. He's a big ossetian. Um, Tamerlan Sabiev.
Yes,
Uh,
Tamerlan, yes.
the ossetian material. Um, And then the next thing was going to be the Chechen, and life just got too complicated, and it never happened. The Chechen Authority is Johanna Nichols at the University of California, Berkeley. She's retired now, but she has a grammar of English, ally, um, and but she's never really done any mythology. Mythology, intellectually weird. You have some adjustments to make. So, for example, there will be things you'll never understand. Um, and they just have to be out there as somehow contradictory and unresolved. And you can't resolve them, no matter. It has nothing to do with intellect. You just don't have the information to do it. It hasn't been preserved in the corpus, the body of myth. Uh, the other thing you have to worry about, excuse me, yeah, the other thing you have to worry about uh, is nationalist agendas. So people will latch on to the mythology as somehow uniquely identified with Circassians or uniquely identified with ossetians or whatever like that. And you have to sort of break it to them that, well, yeah, this looks sort of Ossetian, but over here, this looks sort of, something else. It's a mixture. Because why? For two reasons. One, it's memorized from generation to generation, and that introduces distortions and noise and weirdness. And the other thing is that they borrow stuff. I have a fantastic story about this lady who has tiny little feet, coming from China. Maybe it came from Cinderella is the story. Comes from China because of the obsession with her feet. So maybe, maybe not. Um, but in any event, the nationalists are right in the sense that the corpus of a given people will reflect the local values and the local heritage and the local mentality. On the other hand, even that, in any kind of realistic sense, is also mixed. Um, so the purity sought by the typical nationalists is a kind of fiction that really has caused a lot of mischief on the political stage. I
So
think,
about this like mixing and borrowing, there is similarities between North Caucasian mythology and Greek. For example, the story of Prometheus and
yeah.
Amirani in Georgian and Parmat in Chechen. And I've heard again you mentioning somewhere that it's probably Circassians that did it first and Greeks then borrowed it. Like, how do you? So my question is, do you think those North Caucasian mythologies and Greek have stronger ties than, for example, you would say, um, like, would you say that they have like specifically close connection, or just
Mhm.
as
Yes.
as a general any myth related to each other, like all the stories repeat themselves, all the stories aren't like you can find similar stories anywhere. But would you say there no they have actually some connections, and specifically the Prometheus story?
Yeah, Prometheus, the character change on mountaintop, being good or bad or whatever. Um, well, the Greeks seem to have had a fairly active and prolonged contact with the Caucasus, particularly with the North Caucasus. And we can actually identify some places that were Greek trading posts that later became towns, um, and that reflect Georgian pronunciation or Circassian or whatever. Um, there's uh, the business of the vases, Greek vases with these inscriptions on them that no one could read. And I was approached by a classicist, and Marian Adrian Mayer, and I was able to decipher these things. Why? Because I had been exposed to efforts on the parts of Circassians to write Circassian early on in the computer age, before they actually had fonts that could be used linguistically accurately. But so they were approximating it, and so they'd write an H for a H, and it would also be for a sh, and these other sounds that they use that no one else uses. Um, so it was, how would you say, fairly easy for me to recognize what had been written on the vases. And then she would say, well, there's a picture too, and what you're saying also is supported by the picture, but she never showed me the pictures. Um, so it's um, incontrovertible. I mean, it absolutely cannot be refuted that the Greeks had important and prolonged ties with people from the Caucasus. And they used them as policemen. And they wore their trousers and tunics, which the Greeks did not wear. They wore togas. They wore their trousers and tunics and boots occasionally, as emblematic of their role as police, particularly in Athens, where they had kind of established a role. Um, and there are other things. I mean, this is one thing I might want to write up. I have one more course to teach, and then I'm retiring. Um, so there's Jason and the Golden Fleece, and Medea, and Aeetes, and Absyrtus, her brother, and so forth. Um, and the Georgians are always working on this with this nationalist fervor. There's not a name in there that's Georgian. It's either Iranian or Abkhazian or Circassian or Greek. The Colchis, for example, is Kuzlai. Kuzlai is a mountain area in Circassia. Um, so um, it's weird. I mean, even the region in which it takes place was supposed to be the Caucasus. Yeah, it is. Yeah, there's the name, and it is not Georgian. It is Circassian. Um, so it's going to be a disappointment to the Georgians if I never speak to me again. Uh, but this, scholarship, you have to lay out the truth as you find it, and I was going along, yeah, it's the Georgian Colchis, but I thought, well, a weird name for a region, Colchis, and then I realized, no, it's Quisle. Um, and there's a change in the second consonant that can be traced through Ubykh, which no one knows. It's just um, so I was able to fish that out. Now, given that there are these Greek things, are they borrowings? Yeah, it seems so. Um, Is there a Prometheus anywhere else in the mythological world? Not really. Not in Indo-Iranian stuff, not in Norse, in Germanic stuff, not in Slavic stuff. So this looks like a genuine local Caucasian theme that has spread out into Greek and played a prominent role in the Greek. Um, the other thing is that given the ties between Greek and the Nart material, there is still other material that's much older. And these are retentions from Indo-European. Um, and this is what um, uh, makes the Nart Sagas sort of very valuable outside of just someone studying classical Greek. So, for example, just an example very quickly. There's a passage in the Rig Veda, and it says the waters were kind to Indra, and Indra stood up. And no one understands what that means. So you go to an art saga, well, they try to kill baby Sisruko or baby Pataras. And because they've killed his father, and then the son has vengeance obligation. And so they try to kill the baby by drowning the baby in a kind of classic fashion, like Moses and the bulrushes. So they put him in a basket, the waters wash him down from the mountains to the plains, but they spare him, they don't drown him. Okay. But he is taken on, so it's ambiguous. He is taken on by a man and woman who live in a grave mound. So he is dead. But as a little baby, he suddenly grows huge and stands up and grabs a sword that's hanging from a central pillar. And that sword is found in Valhalla in Norse, hanging from a central pillar. And so Indra stands up. There he is. And just, Indra is actually not an Indo-European name. It's Yinra, which is the one who is mighty, one who is big. And that itself is a Circassian, or also an Abkhazian, Einar in Abkhazian. It's a Circassian name. It's a borrowing. So not only do you have an explanation for why the waters were spared Indra and why Indra stood up, but you have also a name that's best explained as a Circassian borrowing, right, into Indo-Iranian, probably along with the cult. So in a nutshell, that's an example of how the art sagas throw light on very old material that is the thunder god in Indo-European in some way.
I We are already running out of time, and I
Hmm.
well,
Oh, yeah, okay, it's 10:30. Yes, that's right.
yeah, I wanted to say thank you. I know that you've done along with the scholar work, you also have done like humanitarian work and human rights work, and you help with people in the conflicts. I just want to say thank you for that as well, and just general thank you uh, for doing this work and having interested in our culture and our history, our stories, languages, and so on. So, and also
Mm.
for yeah, thank you for having the conversation, having this talk with me today.
No, you're welcome, Musa. You're entirely welcome. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay,
And when the wars were going on in the 90s, I ended up advising the Clinton administration and serving as a back channel diplomat. And I did get a program, plastic surgery program going for women who had been damaged, mutilated,